Working, not working. Okay, now. So, yawning. We all have this behavior. It's contagious, right? And that shows empathy. Then, because this is contagious, that I'm using this as a prompt for you guys to one of the hypotheses that we have, that we all yawn, is because we put out some air to cool down the brain and then for arousal, so we get more alert, right? So that's my expectation. The alternative hypothesis is that you will fall asleep. So I'm gonna play my cards, and my game is like you are fully aware now. And then I'm gonna throw to you guys some funny and unbelievable facts about orchids. My whole talk is about orchids, so let's embrace it. So to begin with, then you will see one of the most amazing pollination syndromes in the whole plant kingdom. This is deception by pseudocopulation. What happens is that the tiny orchid, this orchid has like 1 centimeter long, mimics the genitalia of the female mosquito. So the male mosquito believes that it's copulating, but in fact it's pollinating the orchid. And then you say, wow, yeah, that's the spirit, thank you. Then what is a human-dominated world? How it looks like? Bleak. We are in crisis, right? So this Watson's paper on intact forests, and then you see, we're not going deep into this because I imagine that you have been exposed to this kind of maps throughout your career. But essentially, what I want you to draw attention to is how scarce and sparse is our intact forest. We don't have much left. So we have to take our forests and intact habitats to a good direction in conservation. And then this is just zooming in into the Andes. And so this was a very nice study by Chrisman, in which we see there is some ongoing recovery of forests. There are some forests that they are transformed and then abandoned and then retransformed again. So these figures are not actually encouraging on how our forests are doing in the Andes, essentially. Because 22% show ongoing recovery, this is good, but 61% show either disruption in that trajectory of recovery or arrested completely. And 70% is showing no recovery. So this is essentially the place that I usually go to for field work, and they are currently sovereign stages until we got some strikings from liberty and democracy that is happening in other parts of the world. But let's say, going into the conceptual framework, what is this about? Sometimes we spend a lot of time just doing the research, but I think that we need the baseline to lie that research onto. And that's why I'm gonna spend some time taking you into a trip of different concepts. The first concept, species concept. What is a species? What is the rare to widespread spectrum? How do we define that? And how we acknowledge when a species is actually endemic or not? And then the model group, which I know that you already know, it's orchids. This is a seminar paper by De Queiroz in 28, and then he gathered the 13 different concepts around species. Why it's important to define a species? Because it's the coin that we use for conservation in many angles. IUCN do most of their assessment based on the species level. CITES also allows or permit on commercializing at the species scale. So that's why it's important to know what is a species. It is a species. And this is actually the only opportunity that I have to give this talk in a plant sciences department, because when I usually stay with conservationists, they just like a more straightforward, like straight-on answer to that. But here we can dwell the concepts. So we have, from different perspective, we have what is a reproductive species that can isolate from other species based on the reproductivity of the species. And these concepts apply to all living organisms. But his seminal work was so interesting because he unified all these 13 different ways of approaching a species by saying, guys, you're all right in the sense that we can define a species using different tools like genetics, morphology, biogeography as well, a combination of everything. But the core of how we define a species is a population made of individuals, and then the metapopulations, which is a different scale. We have the different populations all clustered into a metapopulation, and that metapopulation tells us how the species behave, right? And then that's a continuum rather than a category. So to exemplify, to show this, this is the different type of distribution that we got in defining a different type of data. So we have a normal Gaussian, which is continuous morphological traits like size, body size. Cone data with the Poisson that we usually use in ecology. Log normal, what is skew, and gamma. All of them show the extremes, outliers, and something in between, right? The whole spectrum. So let's take this one trait, for instance, intelligence in human, for a human being. So we have super smart people and not that smart people, but that means that at the bottom of the spectrum doesn't mean that it's less human. So we have this eminent person, really good scientist, top of the world, and then you have the other side. Less smart people, we still are humans, because we all fall into that distribution, right? And then and that concept applies in the natural world. This is a Dracula species. I know the name is amazing. So you say, wow, Dracula is a genus of an orchid, only 130 species, and many of them are currently discovered as well. And then this is the whole morphological spectrum of that species. Different color, different shapes, the opening of the flower as well, and everything is part of the same continuous. That's what we have to embrace, the disparity of nature, so we can make sense of what we are looking for. And this tiny species was recently found during a project that Dave and I were carrying out in Colombia. For the very first time, since it was discovered, we discovered the natural habitat. However, that species had been traded legally and illegally since it was discovered over 40 years ago. And then that tells us how this landscape is going on. So we are commercializing species without even knowing where they are, what are the circumstances or the habitat requirements. There are a lot of unknowns. And then how can we make a sustainable use of a commodity that we don't understand, we don't know? Especially with these species that have for instance, have a population size of 17 adult individuals, and it only lives in 2 tiny dots. Then we move on to the next concept, the rare to widespread continuum. So this is a graph that I have prepared that summarizes Rabinov's seminal work in 1981, amazing work in which he summarizes the knowledge of what does a rare species have. What does it make it a rare species? So it's just that because the range is small, well, maybe the populations are high, right? Or maybe, as in the case of whales, The blue whale has a large range, but few individuals, right? And then he came up with these three kind of containers of concepts. So the first one is the actual range, how much of the range is size occupies that species, but also how specialized is and the local abundance. So how many individuals of the same species live in a single area. So that's wrapped up into that single concept of rarity. So you can move from the super rare, restricted to a small area, small population size, super specialized in the habitat, towards a more widespread species with high population sizes or a big meta population. I think that the key point for us to define what is rare and super rare will be the meta population concept, which is part of the fellowship that I'm currently doing. That's part of the thinking of how we can interpret that continuum. Then, Dave, what is
Firecrest.
Thank you. I know that I didn't need to have the name because I had Dave here. So you see how widespread the species is, right? Huge. And then on the other side, we have this beautiful, beautiful oxypogon. Jacob took the photo, and this is the range of the species, small. And then the other day I was texting Jacob asking him, do hummingbirds yawn? And then, well, that's a difficult question. So I couldn't get a video of a hummingbird yawning. And then you have a mixture of different ranges. This is in Southeast Australia. All these frogs have their species ranges of different sizes. And then what is the point of this? So we in conservation define what is an endemic species. And it has different interpretations. Sometimes we call it, like IUCN call it endemic to a country. Sometimes we call it endemic to a habitat or a biome. So it has different scales. But the perception across different users of the concept is that it's rare. So that concept, endemism, operationalize the rare to widespread continuum, right? So it's believed that whatever species is not endemic, then is on the other side, right? It's rather common. So the talk is about endemics, so these rare species at that spectrum, and micro-endemic species, even tinier in population sizes, ranges, and habitat specialization. Then this is the Dracula genus, and then all the every single dot is a species, and then you see that the majority will fall under the 5 kilometers threshold. But then how can we define where a species is a microendemic or an endemic species? That's unknown. We are yet to discover that, and this is part of the reality. Some widespread species and some others. So the color in the dots show the different approaches. In the case of a blue dot is a buffer area, which implies there is only one record in the entire world of that species. And then on the opposite color, reddish, let's say orangey, is an alpha hole, which implies that has more than 3 occurrences. And then we see the whole continuum. So then where do we draw the line? Do we draw the line by a country, by a species, range itself? That's something that is yet to discover. But this is pretty much what we are going to find. And then I think that clustering our data into lineages that are phylogenetically related in some way or another will help us out to distinguish, to make a distinction between an endemic and a microendemic species. Then let's dive into the world of orchids, the model group. So We know that Aeaceae is a taxonomical family, and then the Greek orchid means spectacular, amazing, the most amazing family in the world, obviously. But for more orthodox people or scientists will say that it's the orchid family. Orchid comes from the Greek that means testicles. So you now know how to say testicles in Greek. But this species has over 35,000, this family has over 35,000 species across the world in all continents except Antarctica, and where there is a continual layer of snow. But other than that, it's pretty much in every single habitat in the world, occupies different ranges from tiny mountain tops to pantropical distribution. It's a perfect group, just because I love it, to test this wide, this rare to widespread spectrum. It has everything in a single thing. Also has a messy taxonomy, so we need to dig in more into the taxonomy to know and define the boundaries of the species instead of just collecting data straight from the web. What we have found currently, working with the taxonomy, is that when you hover this data from GBIF or from iNaturalist straight from the platform, they are full of like fundamental mistakes in how they are taxonomically curated and geographically curated. Just to tell you a number, we went curating the vanilla genus, which is, well, you are more familiar with the flavor, which is a synthetic flavor, but nowadays we are trading also the capsules of the family of the vanillas in commerce. It's a sustainable way to make a profit as well. But digging into that, into vanilla, we have found that 66% of the GBI data is wrongly curated. So it's either taxonomically wrong or geographically wrong. What it means that the species may exist, but the record occurs in Costa Rica, and the species native range is not in Costa Rica. So we have two different layers of errors here. And that's something that we've been trying to create across the project. And then we have a very, very tiny number of orchids assessed by the IUCN. So pretty much all the groups have a good representation. They are like doing not that well. In our case, we don't really know. So the latest assessment have compiled over 2,000 species. 55% of them are in danger. And all of those 55%, they are maybe here. They are threatened by trade. So trade is a big issue here. All of those 54% of species under threat, they are threatened by trade. For many of them, we don't even know where they live, the natural habitat. So we cannot assess their status. We cannot do any conservation action without knowing that baseline. And then this is one example. This is Lepanthes cordelliana. We describe it in 2023, and then it only has 5 populations, but each one of the populations live in a fragmented area. So we've been trying to understand not only the species range, but also the single population, how it's living, the single population. And then we are using that with the approach of landscape ecology, quantifying not only fragmentation, but also habitat loss and historical deforestation. So we are taking that into 3 different angles to understand and provide a more rich and scientifically driven information to policymakers and conservationists. Then it comes down to what is an orchid. And this is a fair question. Some people may be asked that in a public event. Then here's the answer. This is a terrestrial orchid, Cleistes. It lives in high elevation environments above 3,500 meters above sea level. This other one is a new species that we are describing. It's called Pleurothallis evi. Maybe you know Pokemon, so we are naming this after a Pokemon. Why? Because taxonomists are crazy and they want to do whatever they want. There is one frog species that was called Niputidea. And Niputidea, the epithet, means no idea. Literally. I'm not making it up. You can Google up and that frog will come up. So we have that creativity going on. Right? This case is Pleurothallis evi because the person that discovered the species he's a ranger in a national park, and he's a great custodian of the species. Not only this, but all the other orchid species. And then he's so proud of that. And then he's a big Pokemon follower as well. So then he said, if I ever find a new species, then I wanted to call it Eevee. There you go. But then by doing those links, we are not only acknowledging the existence of a new species, but also creating those bridges with stakeholders, with people that are the ones that will safeguard the species. So it's moving onto that perceptions as well. Not only taxonomy, not only science, but also a little bit of social work. And then coming back to what is an orchid, then you have epiphytic orchids, terrestrial orchids, completely different shapes, but they all share. Let's see if this works. Oh yeah, perfect. 3 petals, 3 sepals. Okay, sepal 1, 2, 3. Petals 1, 2, and the third one is a modified petal. It's called labellum, and it has the most, let's say, complicated structure of all the other structures in an orchid. See, the sepals and petals are pretty like normal. There is not much information on that, but the labellum, in all of these cases, here, is the adaptation to interact with the pollinator. So it's been said that over 75% of the orchids are pollinated by specialist birds, even some invertebrates as well, Drosophilas, flies, mosquitoes, but it's a one-to-one interaction. So the evolution of this character is the one that actually matters the most in morphology. So whatever you say, well, yeah, orchids comes in different shapes, different colors, but they all have the same thing, which is the labellum. It's a modified labellum to interact with the pollinator. And then induce join, again, breathe in. Let's see how much is coming. I see it. Okay, next, an activity. Which one of these photographs belong to a non-AI species? Okay, who said that it's a non-AI species? Raise your hand. AI, not AI, AI? Yeah, okay, this one? Yeah, this one? No? Okay, yes, this is a real species. It's called Dracula chestertoni. Beautiful labellum, and is pollinated by flies. Why? Well, you see these intricate, they're called lamellas. They grow a fungi inside the lamellas, so the flies come around, eat them, the fungus, and then in that interaction, they remove the pollinia. Pause, and then come back. Endemics in a human-dominated world. Where do endemics live? Endemics across human-modified landscapes and endemics in trade. So we are focusing on, we have different loss of biodiversity causes, and then we are focusing on 2 of them. I imagine that they will have a more like other drivers in habitat, in loss of biodiversity, but we are going to focus this talk only on this, on overexploitation and habitat loss at the moment. Then where do we find orchids, endemics or super rare species? Do we need to travel deep in the forest? Do we need to go into really remote places in the Amazon? Do we travel to the Chocó region? Where do endemics live? Some of them will live in those places. Some others won't. This species, Lepanthes fusagasugensis, I described it in 2013, and this is the habitat where it lives. Pretty bleak, high deforestation, high habitat loss. The species still managed to survive. But is there any maladaptation to that environment? Will it have future the species, or will the population be depleted in a couple of generations? Open question. We don't know. We don't have enough information at population scale to understand those dynamics. We found this species with Dave in one of our amazing fieldwork trips. This Pleurotalis species, Pleurotalis moniquirensis, was found in 9 different places. Those, the triangles will show the place that we found them. And this is the species range. It comes down to, if we calculate that with a buffer of 1 kilometer to 55 square kilometers. But how much of that range is actually suitable for the species? Well, the species is already in trade. So people are collecting the species and sell it for 2 or 3 pounds a plant, a potted plant, like this one. And it comes down to already in trade with a slight half of the actual habitat, right? Not great for population, not great for the species. Then, in order to understand if orchids are more or less sensitive to transformation of the habitat loss, we compare them. So this is a trajectory, Gilroy's 2014 paper, and they followed the trajectory of species richness of birds and dung beetles, and then so the trajectory that around like after 15-20 years they will reach a high species richness in terms of dung beetles and birds. Then where do orchids stand in that spectrum? It's pretty flat. The message here is that when you transform the habitat, species are unable to come back. Why? For 3 main reasons. First, dispersal limitation. Most of them are unable to disperse that long. Second, they require different actors in order to colonize a new habitat. So imagine that the forests were there, then it was removed, then new trees start to grow, and then the seed will arrive. Let's say that dispersal limitation is not a thing. But then the orchid will require a mycorrhizal colony, a host with a set of traits that allow it to anchor it to the trunk, and third, it will need a pollinator. 3 actors, a formula that if they don't go all together, one will actually limit or filter out the recolonization process of the species. And that's been shown in different studies. There is a big limitation. When you lose them, you pretty much lose them almost forever, right? So losing natural habitat leads to a dramatic losses of orchid rare species. What is the action? Retain those natural habitats. fun fact about orchids. Let's see how is my time. Can do pretty well. So this bee, Eulafia, this bee, we don't know the species, goes to a grown orchid for collecting oils. What does a bee do with an oil? Well, put it on and then go for mating. So these bees collect the oil, go to search for the female mates, and then they can copulate. So the successful rate of a male getting this fragrance from the orchid are they have 50% more chances to mate than someone that does not. Funny fact. There you go. Now, international trades of endemics. This is the topic that we love the most at the moment. So endemics make a huge part of international trade. This is CITES data. This is legal trade. It's not illegal. It's legal trade with permits, with the whole bureaucracy behind that. And as you can see, the market relies a lot on endemic species. And then I would say that we haven't partitioned this into micro-endemics because we haven't defined it. But I will imagine that knowing from the species list I know, will be like 60% of them are micro-endemics. The rest will be endemics to the country. This is at country scale. Most of them don't have an IUCN assessment. So I'm currently the co-chair of the species survival group, specialist in orchids, and then our main aim for this quadrennium is to assess all these orchid species that's been traded by CITES, because we see an urgency on random assessments in order to make a more sustainable use of the resource. Then let's zoom into my favorite genus currently, which is Dracula. And then we are trading those species with Dracula chimera, which is one of the biggest Dracula. It's like the size of my hand, and the plants are like 80 centimeters high. And it's been traded for over 40 years. Then Dracula Cordova. That peak that you see there were 40,000 individuals traded from Thailand, not even the range country, from Thailand. And then it kind of like faded away in the system. There were like one or two individuals traded, and then it had a big peak in that moment. What that happened with those individuals, we don't know. We can't track them because they enter Germany and Netherlands. So we lose track of where the species is going. And then we are trading species at the genus level. So in a genus that is compiled of 90% superendemic species, we don't know what we're trading. So this shows the trajectory of that trade. And then this species, Dracula fuligifera, was exported before even known to be a new species to science. There's a huge noise in that. And then if you don't see the area, because they are tiny, so the species lives there and it has one single record. The other one has 6 populations, 6 occurrences, and that's that the range is just 8 square kilometers. Tiny, tiny ranges. And that traded at that scale. Then we were looking at, okay, what is the role of the countries in trading these endemic species? Right high up, the first A and B show the trade of endemic species. So the countries that trade the most: Ecuador, Colombia, the US, and China. So there are some countries that trade endemic species that do not belong to these countries. And then the C and D, we show the countries that export non-endemic species to that country. So we, mirroring what we see here, the US, Ecuador is also exporting a lot of species that do not belong to the country, and so on and so forth. So that how impacts our understanding of a sustainable use. Well, some countries are profiting from resources from countries that do not belong, or from species that do not belong to those countries. So there is an ongoing discussion on how to trigger ABS, access for benefit sharing mechanism, to make countries accountable or companies accountable for that profit. But that's a long-standing discussion. And then what is another angle of that impact? We were interested on this new species. How long does it take a country to export a new species? And then we found that within the same year that the species was described, 17 species were traded. It's the same year. So that actually points out to a very bad process, because not even in a year time you have enough stock material. You need the parental material, and the CITES permit, you need parental material. You also need to get the permits, and then you need to also have the permission from the other side of the importing country to actually export the species. And that's happening at an unbelievable fast pace. And this contrasts with other findings in reptiles, in which the species take between an average of 7 to 8 years. In our case, it takes, in orchid case, it takes an average of 4 years. And we trade more species, more new species than any other group that we have looked at. And then yet, this data shows by 2022, we are still trading species or individuals at the genus and family level, not at the species level. So these numbers are actually big, right? 163,000 individuals traded without even knowing where they are, where they live. And whether they are endemics or not, whether they are widespread species, we don't know. It's a black box. So the current approach that CITES is promoting, it requires some refinements, and then doing a taxonomical curation is a first step to lower down the probability to have smuggling or laundering. And we propose that there are 700 species that can be a pilot to run ABS assessments. So this access for benefit sharing. And the new species need to be really come up or flagged into the CITES system, so we are capable to trace what and where these species are going. Fun fact, so this is an orchid called Oncidium triangulare, and this is a flower of a different family, Malpighiaceae. So this orchid has evolved to mimic the flower shape and color of this family, so that bees, instead of collecting the reward from this family, they go to pollinate the orchid. So it's a deception by mimicry. And that's very successful. You usually see them growing together. This is a big tree, like a 7 to 12 meter tree, and the orchids usually live in the branches of the same very tree. So it's a very smart move for the orchid to be pollinated in a short time without rewards. And then part of what we do in a broad spectrum of endemics and microendemics is also carrying out some conservation actions. So we run workshops in different places with communities. This shows an emblematic orchid that was taken by the municipality, has the iconic orchid for that municipality. So they are embracing that. They are custodians of that and of that species that don't believe anywhere else. Children's workshops, musicals. Juanito is over here. We also train rangers to how to take pictures, good records of these microendemics. So we have set up 7 different workshops with 3 different protected areas. We also, well, I draw this. This is the Muisca date. Is an indigenous people in my country. I draw this, and this is the new species that was named after her. It's called Lepanthes iguaque. So in Muisca culture, we come from Mother Earth, and then she's the representation of Mother Earth. This is a fieldwork guide that we produce with the rangers. So some of the photos they don't look that great, but they were taken by people of the community. So we integrated our professional photographs with their amateur photographs as well. And then we are currently working with the Jardín Botánico de Medellín, the Botanical Garden of Medellín, to set up a program in which we know where the species are and then carrying out some monitoring of them. And then finally, the Altars of Orchids of the Americas. That's part of the project, the ongoing project. And it's a huge help from different people, taxonomists, ecologists, fire people as well, phylogenetics, and trade people. With that, thank you very much. I will be around. This is my contact. You can invite me a drink, but without ice, please. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. We've got time for a few questions, and if anyone has a question online, they can type it out, and then Dom Meeks has kindly agreed to read it out. We've got a question right at the back there. I'll run up. No, they won't hear you online.
Thanks very much. I was just wondering, I mean, you spoke briefly about ABS. To my knowledge, ABS is currently applied just to research and development related benefits, and it seems to me that you're suggesting that it should be applied to all commodity trading, or at least commodity trading of your endemic and rare species. But how do you define ABS around commodity trading in a way that doesn't affect all commodity trading of plant products?
Well, in principle, ABS should be applied to a broad community group of commodities, right? But then, because we flagged out these 700 species, that's the pilot that we are proposing to have a study case on how we can envision that ABS, and then proposing like 3 different approaches for that. One is capacity building. So the importers or the exporters, the companies, because this is run by companies, private companies that profit from that, is that we need to develop a capacity building thing at the Borders Agency. Second, technology to read out barcodes, for instance. We've been working closely with an organization in Ecuador that is developing a new methodology to understand where a species has genetical traceability to be a like captive species, or it was a species taken from the wild. Why? Because the phylogenetic, the genetic signal will have more noise from a individual extracted from the natural population than from a cultivated plant, because they are essentially clones. So their genetic signaling will be more stable. So it's a long way. And ABS, there is a lot of pressure to don't put into place. So at this point, I think it's as an academic exercise in which we provide the study group the lines of how we can implement it currently with the current technology. Technology will improve further in the future. And we are working with some organizations, like the main company that exports native species in Ecuador, Equagenera. They are willing to set aside some of the profits to run a couple of capacity building and have those barcodes in place. It's a difficult issue, as you mentioned, and we are working at the pace that we can.
Tom?
Oh yeah, thanks, Edicson. Yeah, it was a really, really cool talk. I was just wondering if you looked at the specific orchid traits and how much that influences the potential for trade to be sustainable, because obviously if it's got highly specialized reproductive systems, those might become more susceptible to being lost as a result of unsustainable trade, and how much those sort of factors can help predict potential sustainability of trade as well.
Okay, great. This is a great question because traits have been quite informative for some groups, like birds, but for a certain orchid genera, they do not. So our Dracula paper put together a group of 5 taxonomies specialists on that genus, and then we compile all the traits, like morphometrics and qualitative traits. And the result was that the traits do not show any kind of trend. Why? Because the entire genus is commercialized. So there is a huge interest on any species of the same genus. However, when we extrapolate that to different genera, that would be a different game. And that's what we are working now and then trying to understand in order to predict what is the future of other genera. Because essentially in humanity, we don't harvest or utilize species themselves, but lineages. So things that are close together, like potatoes, right? Tomato, potatoes, and they belong to a single group. That's something that we are exploring now at that clade level. So it's a work, it's an ongoing work, but compiling the data at clade scale. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that was great. My question for now is, you've got microendemics in lots of different places, especially in the Andes in Ecuador, Colombia. Deforestation is a lot more intense, and there's a lot more microendism, I presume, in the northern Andes than, say, foothills. And the foothills of the Andes are deeper into into Amazonia. So can you talk a little bit about the trade-offs and the amount of forest that's lost and risk to microendisms via trade versus forest loss in areas, I guess, to rephrase it in hopefully a more simple way, are the species most threatened by trade also most threatened by forest loss, or are there trade-offs and things that are more threatened by trade and more threatened by forest loss?
We don't know, but from what I have seen is habitat loss leads to accessibility, right? And that implies that people get to know more the orchids. Actually, it was interesting because a couple of weeks ago, there was a colleague that came from Cuba, and then I was telling the whole story, let's partner up. And then he said, no, the Botanical Garden of Cuba, not Cuba, the country, leave as less information as possible to avoid exploitation. Why? Because it's a little island, the resources are limited, and then whatever they can have from the forest is a commodity. And then accessibility in an island is pretty much everywhere. So that goes along. So accessibility, yes, but also knowing which kind of species are in the region. Actually, one of the centers of this species being traded, they are close by big cities. So yeah, there is a proximity thing, not proven. So this is kind of like anecdotal at the moment. But yeah, there is. I imagine that if we try an analysis, there will be a strong link between a endemic that is traded and proximity to a urban area.
We've got a question online from Marshall Adams. He says, regarding the CITES requirements for timber species, my understanding is that the permit is required by the importing country, but may not necessarily be mandatory for the exporting country. Could you please clarify whether traders are required to obtain a CITES permit before exporting timber to consuming countries?
Okay, yeah, CITES all are listed in Appendix 2, so they require a permit to be exported. So that's, and then some species are Appendix 1, so their use is even more restricted but not forbidden. So I think that answers the question. Yes, all of the species require, except hybrid species. That's a topic that we are exploring with Dave, in which hybrids, you can export a orchid hybrid without the need of a full screen permit from CITES. And that leads to laundry.
Just go.
When it comes to the trade, going back to that again, you don't talk so much about provenance of the traded material in the sense that to what extent is it wild sourced and to what extent is it being horticulturally propagated? I mean that's implied in your point about barcoding and diversity checking, but it would seem to me that actually you would want to encourage a high volume of horticulturally cultivated, clonally propagated material for the trade. And actually that may, in the context of ex situ conservation or maintaining large populations of these species outside of their range or thinking about species introduction, that kind of skill set around horticultural propagation and maintenance actually might be a really useful industry to support. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, the aim is to get sustainable use. However, like in any other commodity, you will have different sectors, right? So there will be a sector in which people only like orchids, right? Then you go to Tesco's and buy a hybrid. Boom, then you got a solution. There's another sector, another group of people that do like something rare, and they're willing to pay for that rare stuff. And then, as long as CITES allows you to export anything under the label of family or genus, then that collection can be laundered through that label, right? And third, we just want parties to follow the rules, right? So in order for you to export a plant or whatever you're exporting, you need a parental stock, right? That's been legally obtained. And then you need to propagate into a nice environment. And then you apply for the permit. It's a long process. For those new species that have been traded within the same year, that has not been the case. So just follow the rules. However, because the rules are not well set, then there are loopholes in which allow companies, collection and collectors to get what they want. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. So one last round of applause for Edicson. Thank you very much.